Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, Emma finally got her upgrade, so that's her T3 and her uniform, and I'm going to be looking at both in PvE and PvP. Unfortunately, there isn't really much else to look at in this update since it was another kind of mid-month, but I guess that's kind of expected since typically we don't really get December updates, but we did this time around, so I'm guessing that they kind of pushed it into the January area like the other mid-month, and we're getting the full update in February. Anyways, I split the video into PvE and PvP, so if you want to look at just one or the other, you can just look at the timestamps and go to where you want to see. By the way, moving forward, there will be a link in the description for the card stats, where you can see an image of that, instead of me posting it at the beginning of every video. If you don't have the uniform and want to get it and possibly upgrade it, here are what the uniform options look like. They're not really the best options since some of these uniforms are either outdated or not really that great, but regardless, here they are. Before I look at how good the new uniform makes the character, you need to get a kind of baseline on how the character performed previously with the old uniform. So here is with a CTP of Authority versus stage 60 of Thanos. As you can see with the old uniform, the damage wasn't really that great, so I wasn't able to clear stage 60, but I did get to 4.5 bars before time ran out. With the element resist down applying to Cull Obsidian as opposed to Thanos, I get very close to finishing stage 99 and probably can finish it with, I guess, a tighter rotation. But essentially she finishes or doesn't with exactly 0 seconds remaining. The new uniform is a massive upgrade in terms of damage, and you can cancel the 3rd, 4th, and 5th skill, though if you do cancel the 3rd skill, you'll just get the damage accumulation and you won't do damage from it. In addition to this, once you get your ultimate, you can also instant cancel that skill, so you have a lot of options for layering skills on top of one another and dealing a lot of damage at one time. Because of this, you can potentially make a single skill damage proc work, like a CTP of Energy, though keep in mind that a CTP of Destruction wouldn't help her too much because she also has that native penetration. That said, she doesn't really have one skill that lasts too long for you to make use of that 5-second proc, so probably a CTP of Rage or most likely a CTP of Judgment would be the better option for her if you're going specifically for PvE. In terms of how much better her new uniform is, with the old uniform, I only got to 4.5 bars before time ran out, but with the new one, I get to the same point 3 minutes and 15 seconds faster. And then after 17 additional seconds, I end up completing the stage. I tried out 2 rotations for her to see which one worked better, and the one that I settled with was doing 4 delay cancel after the little diamond starts to appear into your 5th skill, instantly cancel that into your 3rd skill and let that fully play out, then use your 2 and 1 as filler before your other skills come back up, and then try to repeat the rotation. The other rotation that I tried out that wasn't as good was using the 3 first and instantly canceling that into the 4th skill, delay canceling that into the 5th skill, and then canceling into your 2 and 1. The reason that I didn't use this rotation is because the damage accumulation that builds up a little bit faster by doing this doesn't seem to outweigh the damage that you get from the 3rd skill itself. Once you unlock your ultimate, the rotation that I tried out was 4, delay cancel 5, cancel 6, cancel 3. As you can see, because of the element resist down, all defense down that ignores immunity, as well as the increased damage, I'm actually able to complete this stage pretty much 4 minutes faster than the previous uniform. With her T3, Emma's stats bump up a decent amount, her energy damage actually goes up a lot, and her HP with the uniform goes up a pretty decent amount as well, because she gains 40% through her passive, which she doesn't have on her other uniforms. Her T3 unlock video is pretty awesome too. She does kind of a runway walk going through her different forms and essentially just demolishing the bad guys. Once I had access to her T3 skill, I was able to complete stage 60 of Thanos 39 seconds faster than before, as well as being able to take down stage 99 of Cull Obsidian 34 seconds faster than before. Her damage improved so much and was so good that I also attempted stage 99 of Thanos with no damage proc and ended up finishing with 2 minutes and 35 seconds. To see how she would fare against World Boss Legend Knull, I took her into stage 9 with full strikers and supports, and she finished with 3 minutes and 23 seconds remaining. This was still so fast even with no proc, so I had to take her into a higher stage to get a better idea of her base damage. The highest stage that I got to that I could reliably sort of clear was stage 29, where I ended up making it to the halfway mark with about 3 minutes remaining, which is essentially the minimum amount that you would need in order to complete the stage. Keep in mind that although this is a full build, it isn't a maxed out build, so my ISO 8 set, for example, wasn't fully awakened during these tests, and I barely had any Uru equipped, as well as having a low level enhancement. I'd suspect that if you go for a maxed out build, including a damage proc, you should be able to break stage 40, stage 50, and even higher with Emma's new uniform. I'm not entirely sure if you'll be able to because of the restrictions in World Boss Legend, but her damage is definitely there. On the PvP side, I tested the character at tier 2, tier 3, and with the artifact. So all the tests that I did at tier 2 and tier 3 are without the artifact, and then once I get to tier 3, I do the tests with the artifact as well to give you an idea of how much of a difference the upgrades make as well as the artifact itself. From this clip you can see that I am able to take down characters like Gilgamesh even with 2 supports and having that mental damage immunity. This is largely due to her 5th skill, which has mental resist down and essentially ends up nullifying his mental immunity. I unfortunately wasn't able to win that first fight because I lost to Cersei's awakening skill burst damage, but the fact that I was essentially able to wipe out the full team at tier 2 only was pretty impressive. Even though the team is the same in the second fight, the builds are different, so I believe that Cersei has a damage proc here, and fortunately for me, the penetration doesn't go through my invincible, and this time around, I'm able to take down the full team. If you thought that was impressive, I also took her up against the Sentry and a Doom with a Colossus support, and ended up winning, which I thought was even more impressive. One thing that's really nice about her new uniform is that in PvP on auto, the AI prioritizes the 3rd skill, which is the iframe ignore, as well as the 5th skill, which is the heal. Aside from that, if both of those skills are down, the AI goes into the 4th skill for the most part. And the best part about this is that all 3 of these skills are iframes, and the 3rd skill, having that iframe ignore, also has the 85% damage mitigation, which constantly is up because she constantly activates it if the opponent goes into iframe. Unfortunately, due to my challenger buffs that I can't remove, I wasn't really able to test how well she does against Wolverine in terms of her survival, because my challenger buffs make it so that I can ignore that immortality effect, and as you can see, she takes out Wolverine pretty quickly. Here are the differences doing the exact same fight, but this time at T3. You'll probably notice that she bursts down opponents much quicker, or she doesn't get to that halfway health mark as often. It won't be anything crazy noticeable, but I had to include the fights at T3 so that I can have a baseline to see how she does at T3 without the artifact and with the artifact, which I'll show after these fights. Funny enough, this time around with the stat bump to increase her HP, I was able to survive Cersei's burst damage from her awakening and totally win the fight as a solo. One interesting thing that I noticed about the 5th skill is that if the 5th skill gets cancelled early, then she doesn't get her heal, which is kind of an unfortunate side effect and is one of the reasons why I went with a CTP of Authority over a CTP of Regeneration. If you're wondering which one of these 2 CTPs to go with for a defensive build, I would say that either of them are fine and that you won't notice anything too insanely drastic if you build her with one or the other. There's pros and cons for either of the CTPs, so I mentioned that, for example, I didn't go with regen because her heal gets cancelled, so one of the things that makes regen really good is that the character iframes a lot, so you can kind of get that passive heal from the CTP proccing, as well as increase the heal from her 5th skill. And then if you reforge the regen and get the penetration, you can knock the opponent out of their iframes a little bit more and increase your survival that way. Not to mention that her base HP for blast type is above average, so the health shield works pretty well in that regard. On the flip side, if her 5th gets cancelled a little bit too early too often, then you won't benefit too much from the recovery from the regen. So with the CTP of Authority, you have that invincible that they have to go through on top of the mitigation from your 3rd skill. And if you are able to reforge the CTP with that steel effect, you essentially take 0 damage every time the 3rd is up, and that steel effect is active as well. On top of this, the super guard break immunity makes it so you can't be head brocked and be kept from using your 3rd skill, meaning that you'll reliably be able to get that 85% mitigation up almost all the time. By the way, if you weren't aware, this is what Emma's artifact looks like. This is at max level, so at level 6 you get 35% reflect to basic damage that you receive, and this goes down by 5% for every level that you go down. So if you are at level 3, for example, I believe you start at 20, at level 4 you're at 25, level 5 you're at 30, and then obviously the max is 35 at 6. I had a 4-star selector lying around, so I ended up using it and putting it on Emma to see the difference that it made in PvP. By the way, if you wanted to try a hybrid or more offensive based build, then I would highly recommend a CTP of Greed, since a CTP of Destruction is kind of redundant considering that her base kit has penetration in it. The CTP of Greed actually synergizes pretty well with her, since she often opens up with her 3rd skill, and because the Greed instantly procs and the skill is an iframe ignore, then it could potentially one-shot opponents right off the bat. You also benefit from that heal that pops up every once in a while, and if you are able to reforge to get that ambush effect, you also get the benefit of being able to reliably take out opponents that you have a disadvantage versus, like Spider-Man's for example, which she can also do pretty well with a reflect, but also opponents that have that steal effect on the CTP of Authority. However, the only downside of this is that it doesn't synergize too well with the reflect, because you won't be able to take more hits and reflect it back to your opponent. You can see a perfect example of the invincible from the CTP of Authority as well as the reflect artifact working here, since I do nothing and Cersei basically takes out herself. You can see another example of that here, with Doom's damage being all over the map and him instantly dying as soon as Emma spawns in and does all that reflect damage back to him. This is kind of another reason why I'm first testing out a CTP of Authority, since if the opponent isn't able to break through that invincible or possibly through that 3rd skill mitigation coupled with the steal effect doing so little damage, then they essentially just get reflected back and end up dying that way. This means that if I'm taking on opponents that have awakening skills but no penetration, then they won't be able to go through that invincible and will likely end up dying from reflect damage. Whereas if I had a regen, they could potentially go through the regen shield and I would die that way. If you wanted to play the character on manual, you basically just use the same skills that the AI is using. If the opponent goes into an iframe, you can use your 3rd skill or your iframe ignore, and you basically want to use that every single time it's up to get that damage mitigation. From there, you spam your 5th skill every time that is up and just stay in that to get the healing, and the same with your 4th skill, which actually has pretty high priority. If all of those skills are down, you can try weaving in a 1st skill which has a little bit of an iframe on it till those are back up. Regardless of the build that you go with, you can see that Emma is really good with the new uniform alone, regardless of the artifact and the T3, since you saw that I was able to take down top metas including Doom himself at T2. The T3 just makes her more reliable, and the artifact just makes her a bigger threat in PvP content. Depending on the ban list, I don't really think that she'll take over the timeline meta, since most of those characters are dominated by either having an immortality effect or 2 lives. But on certain weeks, like this one in Challenger, she'll do pretty well as being a very solid option in Alliance Conquest. One last thing I wanted to note is that her 85% damage mitigation buff that activates on her 3rd skill is a buff itself, so if you're facing opponents that have remove active buffs on them, then she has a little bit of a tough time surviving against them since her mitigations will be so low. So even though you saw me take out Wolverine fairly quickly, he is actually one of the characters that opens with his 5th skill and has the remove all active buffs on the 5th skill, meaning that if Emma uses her 3rd skill and then Wolverine uses his 5th skill, he could potentially remove that and take her out that way. But yeah, that aside, I would say that the devs have done justice to this character with this uniform, and even if you don't have the character at T3, I would highly recommend picking this one up. That does it for this video. The next one that I'll be doing is probably an updated Alliance Conquest tier list, as well as an upgraded Timeline tier list, and sort of detailing a little bit about how that tier list works. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing and possibly sharing the video with other people you know, since it'll help my channel grow and I have more incentive to inform and entertain you guys with more videos. As always, thanks for your time and watching, but the video is now over.